Hello everyone, and may I welcome you to this webinar from Kelso Consulting, and it's all about launching your B2B tech service and the errors to avoid. We'll particularly be focusing on media and PR launches, but we'll certainly also be touching on launching it to clients, prospects and that sort of thing. And indeed many of the messages for ensuring a successful press launch and indeed having credibility with journalists apply equally, if not even more so, to people like clients, prospects, analysts, industry influencers, that sort of thing. So many of people joining us already know Kelso Consulting. Some of you don't, so I'll just say a little bit about us. We're in the business of building reputations. Ultimately, in the B2B world, it's trust and credibility that opens the doors to decision makers and makes people want to buy. And indeed in corporate environments where they have to build a consensus and are always worried that a wrong choice will rebound on them later, they very much feel that they are putting their reputation on the line, so they want to do it for people with who they trust, with credibility and reputation. We're very much in the business of helping businesses, particularly B2B technology businesses, build that. And certainly elements of this include high impact press coverage, gaining awards, analysts, important proof points like case studies, being an expert speaker at events, writing knowledgeably on a subject, and demonstrating strong thought leadership, as these are all the things where evidence shows that the more senior a person is, the more they are looking for these sorts of clues, and the less they are looking at product features. Clearly those are important, but once a certain floor has been reached, it's not the price and the features that matter, it's all the surrounds around trust, credibility. Will it deliver? Will it deliver in the future? Will the business be around to deliver in the future? A little bit about myself. My name is Tim Priseman, and I'm a director with Kelso Consulting. I've been advising technology, IT consultants, and indeed SaaS providers for over 20 years. Indeed, I was indeed, one of the case studies we'll show was for a business that was an early SaaS provider. In fact, they were so early, the term SaaS hadn't even been invented at the time. You tended to use this very cumbersome application service provider. I have particular experience in getting such businesses in high impact media, helping them knock down the doors of senior decision makers. I've got 4 national PR awards for such campaigns, including 3 of them for B2B technology businesses. And one of the things I spend a lot of time talking about, and indeed working with clients, is thought leadership. And a lot of that is covered in my book, The Thought Leadership Manual, available on Amazon, the perfect Christmas present for friends, loved ones and colleagues. Hint, hint. So, what we're going to be covering is very much how to ensure a successful press launch for your new service, your new software, and the traps to avoid. And many of these are mindset traps which cause people to go down the wrong path, both indeed as journalists and indeed with their clients and prospects. I'll be covering some specific pointers for startups. I have a couple of pointers as well if you are a company from overseas launching in the UK. We deal a lot with overseas companies. They may be American, they may be Israeli, it can be from indeed Ukraine and elsewhere. So a couple of pointers specific for those. We'll be looking ultimately at what works for the media, particularly for technology businesses, and how you can utilise that to build the brand, the credibility, the awareness of your business. And we'll be tackling questions. So certainly we'll be having a question slot at the end, but if you've got questions, do fire them along. Do fire them in as we go along, and I'll see if I can pick them up as we go as well. So, getting into the media, well, in theory, it is very straightforward. In practice, it can be difficult, otherwise everyone would do it all the time. But in theory, it's straightforward. You first of all think, who are your key audiences? Who are the people you want to influence? So that certainly are your clients, your prospects, your referrers, and perhaps also more broadly, who are the people that are credible with them? So, for instance, if you want to influence chief technology officers, who are the people that are important with them? Well, certainly the media they read, their colleagues, their people who directly report to them, the other members of the C-suite, and indeed they may well be industry analysts and other people like this. So who are your key audiences? What sources are credible with them? Then you have something newsworthy to say. Newspapers report newsworthy things. Trade media report newsworthy things for their particular trade. Ultimately, you go about dealing with the media in the right way. Clearly, phoning them up 5:30 on Friday evening isn't the right way to go about it. Quite frankly, often press releases aren't the right way to go about it, or they're part of the way, but they're not the way that's going to get the best bit for you. And also, quite frankly, don't give up after one attempt. A lot of businesses put out one press release, didn't get any result, give up. Well, it's a bit like a sales exercise. If you did one sales campaign, didn't get any results from it, you wouldn't give up selling to everybody. You'd look at the campaign, see how you could learn and improve, be more successful the next time. The same applies with media relations. So, in terms of being of interest to the media, there are effectively three ways to think about it. You could be the news. What you do is inherently newsworthy. The reality is this is linked to a fairly small number of either big or very high profile businesses. If Richard Branson balloons around the world, it's news. If I balloon around the world, it's not news. If Goldman Sachs decides to do something, everyone wants to know what Goldman Sachs is doing because they seem to know where the money is, so it's news. If a big listed PLC does something, it's news. But for most of us, that isn't the case. We only become the news when things go spectacularly wrong, and there is a data theft, or a product crashes and brings down something prominent, or whatever it is. So the first one is be in the news. But for people who are on this webinar, the reality is, while we may want to be that, it isn't a realistic option for us. The second option is make the news. This is where you do something so interesting and so relevant and so important that publications want to talk about it, want to write about it. Now, this is more realistic, and clearly this is what people have in mind when they think we must do a press launch for our new product. It's so important that we need to get coverage. It may be important for us, but is it important for the rest of the world? Well, we'll be looking at that in much more detail, because if we're going to make the news, we need to understand what journalists are looking for. And quite frankly, a lot of people, and we've dealt with numerous startups over the years, fall into a bit of a mindset trap around here, and we'll be going through that bit in more detail. And the third way, and I have to say this is if you are looking for sustained coverage for your technology business, the third way is be the expert who is interviewed about the news. And this is a far more sustainable position. It's also, if you get it right, an enormously powerful position as well. And we'll be touching on that towards the end, but I do other webinars on that subject, so most of that will be for those. Okay, so mindset traps to avoid, and this is where we encounter businesses who are going in the wrong direction, and ultimately, I wouldn't say disaster is going to follow, but certainly a lack of success that will hold them back is going to follow, and certainly they won't be getting the results they're looking for avoidably. What are these mindset traps? Well, the first mindset trap is new is good. And it's always very tempting in marketing to think, well, what's different about what we're doing? It's new. It's new, ergo it's good. And certainly in the consumer area, new is indeed good. People want to be there at the leading edge. They want to have something that other people don't. They want to have bragging rights. New is good. However, in the B2B world, new is not good. When you say it is new, particularly in technology, people hear it is unproven, it is buggy, it's not been used by other people yet, it is risky. New is to be avoided. In fact, in the B2B world, most of the B2B world, most businesses, most of the time are looking for safe, well-used, proven technology, not new, leading edge, potentially problematic technology. There's a number of reasons for this, over and above the fact we've all had software that's full of bugs and has caused enormous frustration and hasn't worked as it said on the box until various iterations later on. And clearly the CTOs, the business owners, the finance directors, whoever you're targeting, they have all been through it in their career. It also means it may not be a technology that ends up proving popular, gets supported, may not be around in a few years. There's all manner of things that you can think of why people in the B2B world don't think new is a good idea. And yet, with many people, it is businesses almost can't stop themselves saying it about it. So the first thing is, if your position is this is new, I would say that is, you've already fallen into one of the biggest mindset traps. The second mindset trap is it's a big deal for us, so it must be a big deal for others. It's important for our business. It is so important for our business. It's major. We've put so much time. We've been working on this for 6 months solidly. And of course, it is a big deal for you. I'm not saying it isn't. But sadly, because it's a big deal for you, doesn't mean it's a big deal for clients, prospects, or journalists. And it's very easy with the pressures of a launch, the pressures of development, the financial pressures, the time pressures, why teams don't want to hear that, okay, we've got this fabulous product, but for the rest of the world, it's still a so what. But again, if you are in this mindset where it's really big because it's big for us. Unless you are a giant company who's going to roll it out across millions of users like Apple with its iPhone, the reality is for the rest of the world, no matter how big a deal it is for you, it's nothing to them. Allied to that is people believing they are the next big thing and journalists are desperate to hear about them. The reality is, if you speak to any journalist, they get someone ring them up almost on a daily basis saying, we're the next big thing, can we tell you about it? They've heard so many next big things that disappeared without trace, or maybe they didn't disappear without trace, but they weren't the next big thing, they were just one of many in the market. So again, if your proposition is based around how you're going to completely revolutionize the market, now that's absolutely fabulous. The journalist will be really keen to interview you when you've started to revolutionize the market. But when you have 5 customers and you've been around 3 weeks, the reality is in virtually all B2B areas, unless you are incredibly lucky, they're not interested. They want to hear about proven technology that's been widely used. They don't want to hear about unproven technology, which they write a big bit about it, and 6 months later it's disappeared. Well, maybe not the final one, but a very important one as well, is the desire to talk about your product features. Now, we know in marketing, we know it is benefits that sell, not features. And yet, in seeking, having fallen into perhaps some of the other mindsets, then suddenly features still come to the fore in what people want to talk about journalists. We've got this extra offer in here, we've got this extra widget here, we can do that, we can do this. The reality is the journalists just don't care. Why don't they care? Because outside of a small number of specialist technology websites and journalists, most journalists, they don't write about technology, they write about problems involving technology. They do not review different bits of software and compare them. There's a number of reasons why they don't do this. One is because they do not feel able to do that. They don't use the software, so how would they be able to do a meaningful review of it? And secondly, even if they could, most of them really don't think it makes for interesting reading. In fact, a lot of journalists spend their time trying to avoid technology companies because they do not think they will lead to stories, on the whole, from having had lots of meetings with previous technologies where they've talked about their wonderful features all the time and not given them the sort of thing they want. So the thing with getting in the media is to give journalists what they want and to beware that they've had dozens, if not hundreds, of pitches from technology companies in the past, and most of them have left them cold. Clearly not the pitches done by us, because we're well aware of these things and give journalists what they want. But there's a lot of I know from horror stories from journalists, there's a lot of baggage that you have to overcome with what happens elsewhere. And then the final one is the belief that using technical jargon shows that you are experts. Now, this is a trap every profession falls into. Lawyers blather on in obscure language. doctors were recently in the media being criticised because the patients couldn't understand, on the whole, what they were telling them about their medical condition. It is the same for technology companies. Now, on the whole, most technology companies don't sell to technologists. They sell to finance people, HR people, business owners, whoever. These people have no idea what you're talking about. You may think it reassures them that you're using language they don't understand. You may even be able to panic a few people into it, but the reality is most people want to understand what they're buying, not at a feature level, but in terms of solving the problem that they are facing with. But even if you are selling to technologists, there's still a difference between specific technical terms and wholesale buzzword bingo jargon. And it's usually, again, buzzword bingo jargon. Now, most technologists actually prefer to hear something in clear English. Of course, they expect a specific term for certain things, but they still don't want acres of management speak. And ultimately, most decisions aren't made in a vacuum. The CIO, the CTO, still has to discuss things with other colleagues. He has to perhaps get a budget for it. He has to get approval for it. He has to sell it into the department that wants to use the software, whatever. You still need to help that person sell it internally, and they're not going to do it with jargon. A couple of traps that are particularly relevant to startups, but it's worth bearing in mind for others, because I've seen plenty of established businesses fall into these traps. And ultimately, number one, it's that you talk big. You are the next big thing. You've done this, you've done that, you've got some money, and you completely fail to pass the sniff test. The journalist looks at your website. It's amateurish. I think it would be fair to say many technology companies, not so much SaaS ones, but certainly other technology companies, are actually well known for having poor websites. Why is this? Well, my guess is because technology companies see websites as a technology issue, so they think they should do them themselves. Websites are your shop window. They are a communications exercise. They are a design exercise. The technology is merely an enabler. Don't have an amateurish website. It creates all the wrong impressions for you, people who might want to refer you, people who want to work for you, people who may want to use you. Many tech businesses I come across, they have no phone number, or they use a mobile number, or the phone number is hidden away. Maybe you don't want people calling you because it's hard for you to deal with them and hard for you to staff them and things like that. Well, that may well be the case, but think about the impression that is created. We all know an established business has an established phone number that's reasonably easy to get hold of. If you don't have that, you don't look like an established business. The same with having a PO box number or a residential address. Now, it's not only startups that put different styles of poor quality selfies on their leadership team. Other businesses do this as well. But whatever size, however established your business is, think about the impression this creates. If you can't afford a photographer to come in and take some decent photographs of your leadership team, what does that say about the resources of your business? And don't think people aren't going to look you up on LinkedIn. It's the first place they're going to go. And again, if you've been talking up how wonderful, how big you are, all of these sorts of things, you have an amateurish LinkedIn company page and 2 employees on it, you've got to think, what's the impression that you have created? Or indeed, what would be the reaction from realizing that you are creating a false impression. Don't think that your smoke and mirrors are fooling anyone. Maybe 15 years ago the smoke and mirrors in the technology space was fooling people, but the world has moved on. Everyone's come across someone who's in fact come across lots of people who's not being truthful about where they are with their development, with their funding, with their backing, with their clients, that sort of thing. It's par for the course. Don't believe your smoke and mirrors is going to fool people. I mentioned about some of the traps for overseas entrants. The first and the biggest one, and indeed this sometimes applies to businesses here, is that there is no UK story. Now, no matter how big you are in Europe, no matter how big you are in San Francisco or Israel, if you do not have people in the UK using your product when you come to launch, no one really is going to be interested. Maybe, certainly there's no reason why you can't have a case study or an announcement of an inaugural client that is an overseas company using that in Britain. That is absolutely fine. But if you don't have any sort of client in the UK, my strong advice in terms of putting out a product launch is wait till you've got one. It may be important, you may see that this enables you to get a client, but the reality is a new product in the UK from someone the journalist probably hasn't heard of, that no one is using, does not make a compelling story. The other thing for overseas companies is thinking UK journalists are like those in your own country. Now, journalists in different countries and the media in different countries are very different. For instance, in Britain, it is incredibly hard, quite frankly, it's incredibly hard to get journalists to even turn up to a meeting in their own coffee bar. The days of wining and dining, most journalists in most sectors, with perhaps a few exceptions, are well and truly over. It's very different in some countries. Journalists there are much more interested in attending launch events. In Britain, journalists don't like technical detail. In other countries, they love technical, or in some other countries anyway, they love technical detail. It's horses for courses. But the big assumption is just because you are big news in your country and are getting lots of coverage, that the UK journalists are going to go, oh, that's really interesting, thank heavens you're coming here, we're going to report about it. It definitely doesn't work that way. It's a very demanding media environment with journalists that set very high standards in London, which is one of the leading financial and technology centres in the world. It's a big C, and you are going to need a big story, or at least the right elements to have any hope of getting coverage in anything with credibility. And that's particularly the case when you're looking to get into the sorts of trade publications that are read by your prospects. So if you are a financial technology one and looking to get into banking or insurance or whatever publications, you need to have strong credentials and a good story along the lines we've talked about earlier in those ones. If you are a law tech, you need law firms using you. Okay, but there are other ways, but which we will move on to. But ultimately, journalists want to write about people who have credibility, and you need to get yourself, for your launch, looking the part. You actually need a track record. This might seem catch-22, we're a new business, we want coverage to get a track record, but journalists aren't in that business, particularly in the B2B space. they want to start talking to people who have a track record. If it's a new business with no track record, you need to have people with a track record or movers and shakers involved with it. Or you need to have strong endorsers. You need to think, how can we build this halo of credibility? But as we'll talk about, if you want sustained coverage, or you don't have these things and you need coverage, where you need to be talking about is the problems you solve, not the features that you have at the moment. And ultimately, you need to have a strong answer to whether it's from clients, from journalists, from whoever, to WSI, GAF, which, if you haven't guessed it, is why should I give a fig? As I often say to people in my team, what is our answer if someone simply turns around and goes, and so what? What is the answer to that? And make sure that your launch with whoever you're dealing with has a strong answer to that deals with their immediate concerns, not your own internal imperatives. So, building the reputation of your business, your brand, your products. What works? Well, as I've mentioned, product launches are hard work. I'm not saying you shouldn't do them. They can be successful, but you have to get all of the elements I was talking about so that the stars are aligned. But ultimately, a product launch only has a finite lifespan. It's quite hard to keep the coverage going. There are opportunities. You get the launch, you get announcements of major clients signing up to it, big brands, perhaps you meet a particular milestone, perhaps you do these sorts of things, and you can get further coverage for it in trade publications and keep that alive. But it's never going to be the sort of level of coverage that knocks doors down, albeit it certainly can be very credible to reuse it in your marketing, saying we were described as X, Y and Z by certain publications. However, if you can build on that to become the expert commentator on the issues that are relevant to your service, what are the problems, what are the pains, what are the business issues that you are solving, then you are in a very powerful position for sustained coverage that doesn't just mention your product, but positions you as an expert. And we took that approach as an example last year with the launch of Cyber Decider, which is an cyber insurance comparison engine that's particularly aimed at insurance brokers, but there are opportunities for insurance companies and indeed the wide range of lawyers that specialise in insurance matters to make use of it as well. And as you will see, by talking not just about the features of it, but also a number of aspects, to talk more generally about cyber insurance and indeed cyber problems, cyber incidents, cyber hacking, but particularly the shortcomings of existing cyber insurance, we were able to get a wide range of coverage, including the Times, Telegraph, the Mail, as well as the publications that they saw as particularly important to them, Insurance Times, Post magazine, and some of the specialist maritime insurance areas, and also, of course, specialist information security ones for their credibility as well. So with them, the success was, first of all, we got them talking about issues. Secondly, within their comparison engine, which of course is a software as a service, they have most of the insurance policies and their features so that you can search and analyse them. And we use this as the basis for an analysis to give various talking proof points and indeed industry insights as well. So it's from getting away from the features of the product to illustrating how it's solving the problem and giving expert insights to that. Building on that, for a technology company, you're dealing with important business issues. You'll have a lot of insights, both from your own team and the clients you are dealing with. You are in a very strong position to take a thought leadership position, writing articles, white papers, end user case studies, undertaking research, perhaps even campaigning. I won't go on to campaign too much, but that's covered in my webinar on how to be a thought leader. And again, an example of this, in this case it was research, when T-Systems, which is the ICT, the corporate ICT arm of Deutsche Telekom, they were launching their cybersecurity practice last year, and we undertook a survey, wrote it up in the report, got coverage, at least 2 mentioned Daily Telegraph, the Times, as well as a wide range of technology, business, all sorts of ones as well, to help boost not just awareness for their new service, credibility, online authority, all of those good things. And that was enabled by research, in this case looking at we were analysing to what extent were people using their computers at home a unprotected backdoor into corporate networks through device sharing, people having sloppy home security and then doing work on it, that sort of thing. And as I mentioned with Cyber Decider, if you're a SaaS provider, or indeed if you have data from other sources as well, the analysis of your own data is a very powerful tool for generating sustained coverage, industry reports, that sort of thing. A particular example we did was Global Expense, who were a software as a service innovator. They launched and have indeed been bought up and swallowed up and are now a part of SAP at the moment. But they went from 3 people to the industry leader employing 90 people before they were purchased, in that case by Concur. So a very successful grow, expand and sell example. They were doing employee expenses management. The large amount of data there meant we could create annual benchmark reports. We would do an annual report into employee expense claims, giving interest and insights, that sort of thing. Each year it would get do a media launch for it. It would get lots of prominent coverage. Then we could reuse the report for different things throughout the year. Over the years, it positioned them as the experts on it. So if you remember the MP's expenses scandal, when that broke, Global Expense got lots of invitations to speak and was on TV and things like that. Not that they knew anything about MP's expenses, but that's not the point. They were able to say, well, we don't know about MP's expenses, but we know about everyone else's, and there's no way this would be allowed in any other organisation in the country. So it gave them a very powerful position of authority. If you look on our website in the case study section, there's an interview with the chief executive which explains just how how powerful this position of expertise was in allowing them to sell at the highest levels, and indeed they were able to outpunch their larger competitor, which had better technology than them, because they were able to use this to mount challenger sale techniques, and secondly they went in with the credibility that comes from being seen as the market leader. Okay, can I invite questions? Okay, so the first question I have is, to what extent do journalists understand technology? Well, it's a bit of a spectrum, because there are some journalists, many of them freelancers, so they might crop up on different publications, who are deep experts. They are technology geeks. They understand it to the very, very high level of detail, maybe even more so than many of the technologists in businesses. So there are some deep experts out there, but most of the time you will be looking to deal with journalists that don't write about technology much. So for instance, if you're a fintech looking to get into insurance or financial ones, a bit like Cyber Decider, you're dealing with journalists that cover a broad area of insurance news or shipping news or whatever news. And the reality is they use technology all the time, but they're not technologists in the same way most of your business prospects aren't. As one journalist said to me, technology is important and every business needs it. Furniture is important and every business needs it. I don't write about furniture much, and I don't write about technology much. What journalists want to write about is the business challenges that are facing their clients, their readers. What is going to get their readers reading the whole article, talking about it, commenting about it. And so certainly problems that technology solves are things they write about all the time. The ins and outs of the technology, much less so. Okay, I've got a long question here. Let me just read through it. What publications do you start with? Who is best to contact? And what is the typical chain of communication that leads to publications? Is it essentially a pitch from the start? So, in terms of what publications you start with, I think it's slightly what story do you have to tell and where do you want to get it? And this will be is covered in more detail in a webinar we've just done called How to Get My SME into the National Media. We've got a recording of that, so I'll send that through. But in terms of it, so I would suggest, in terms of publications, I would use the analogy that you are a football team and you've just formed. So do you go in and play the top teams in the land, or do you have a few home friendlies to warm yourself up? And so I would start to deal with publications in the first instance that are home friendlies, so you can practice a bit on them. They're going to treat you okay, and you can sharpen yourself up for dealing with more demanding publications. So for some businesses, their local media might be the home friendly, or it might be journalists in a particular niche technology area where they're really interested in the subject, or maybe it's some journalists you already know. But I would actually start with the home friendlies before you launch yourself at the Financial Times or the Daily Mail or whoever you want to deal with. So home friendlies build up, so that's where I would start. Who is the best to contact? Well, one really good approach is to use their search to see which journalists are writing about subjects that's relevant to you, and then phone them up with a very quick pitch along the lines of, I saw you wrote about this yesterday. There's other aspects that's really important, but for instance, XYZ, when would be a good time for me to tell you a bit more about them? And they'll probably say, send me an email, in which case have a really punchy email ready to go, follow it up, follow it up, follow it up. If it doesn't work, try that approach with a couple of other journalists. If it's not working after a couple of others, have to think about whether what you're trying to communicate to them is interesting and relevant to those journalists. Of course, the other thing is to hire a public relations agency, but we won't go into that. Okay, next question. We've got time for just one more question after this. If you've got one, send it through. What are the hot tech topics at the moment? Well, I'm sure you can guess those at the moment. This year, definitely AI has been the breakthrough one. Cybersecurity continues to be a big issue, albeit it is event driven. The event might be cybersecurity attacks, data security breaches, or it could be warnings from prominent people, but certainly cybersecurity has become a hardy perennial one. Things around data privacy, I can see data privacy is actually going to be, it's been a big issue. I'm going to predict it's actually going to become more of an issue as people now have the powers under GDPR. The fines are starting to come through. Behaviours within businesses haven't quite changed to catch up with the new environment. People are starting to enjoy using their new powers. So I think data privacy is going to be potentially even bigger next year. And of course, very recently, medtech got into the news with warnings around implants. I can see, at least for the next few weeks, that there's going to be lots of follow-on stories about that, whether that's going to span out into a bigger issue or whether it's going to be dead within the next few weeks. Time will tell. Okay. Thank you very much for joining me, Tim Priceman from Kelso Consulting. Ultimately, if you're looking for campaigns that build your reputation, give you high impact links that build online authority and generally position you as an industry expert for awards, speeches, articles, thought leadership, please do get in contact. Otherwise, I hope you will be joining us for our other webinars in the very near future. May I wish you a very pleasant rest of the day.